Well, I've been doing a lot of tinkering but not very much flying, so I think it's about time for some sightseeing. I'm at Caloundra Airport today on Australia's Sunshine Coast. Having said that, it's just started raining, but I'm going to be exploring some of the Aussie X strips, but I'm also going to start to take a look at some of the Twin Otter's systems in a bit more depth. And today I thought I would take a look at the electrical system. Now this is a custom electrical system in the Twin Otter, which borrows very little from the FSX built-in electrical system, although there are a couple of crossovers. The DC master switch, for example, when I turn that on, the FSX DC master comes on as well, and I know that because my Elite radios and my Cytec radios come on. So we have a DC master switch, we also have an external battery switch, and I'm going to come back to these later, but I'm just going to flip them on for now without any more comment, because I want to have a look at the starter panel and the starter system. Now the Twin Otter has turboprop engines, and at the heart of a turboprop engine there is a gas turbine, a jet engine essentially, and we start this by spinning up the gas generator turbine, pumping fuel into it, and then introducing a spark to ignite it. And once the engine's lit, it's self-sustaining, so we can turn off the starter motor and also the igniter, and in fact that starter motor is actually the generator that's connected to that engine, and so once we switch that over, the engine is turning the generator instead of vice versa, and it generates power that we can use. I'm going to say more about that later as well. So to achieve all that, we've got a switch, two switches in fact on the start panel. This is a double header switch, one for the right hand starter motor and one for the left hand starter motor. But you're probably wondering what all these other switches are for. Now it just so happens I've got a detailed model of the turboprop starter system in my kitchen, so let's go and have a look at that. So that's the igniter spark, and if we turn on the fuel pump, the engine lights and we don't need the igniter anymore. But under certain conditions the airflow through the engine can be disrupted, and in the worst case the engine can stop, and this is what's called a flameout, and it can be quite inconvenient, shall we say. So as a precaution we can arrange to fire the igniters continuously, and if we get a flame out, the engine should relight again before it has a chance to spin down. So that's the purpose of the manual ignition switch, incidentally sometimes referred to as continuous ignition, which makes a little bit more sense. Under normal circumstances this switch is set to normal, this is a two-position switch, but under circumstances where we might expect to encounter disruptive airflow through the engines, particularly at low power settings, we'd flip that to manual or continuous ignition in case of a flameout, and the conditions under which we do that would be outlined in the aircraft flight manual, but typically it's something like descending on low power through very heavy turbulence. So that's about it. We've got these other two switches which are labelled engine igniter left and right, number one or both. So I'm just assuming here that each engine combustion chamber actually has two igniters, and usually we run both in tandem, presumably for more reliability, but there's an option to use one of those igniters. Don't really know what the purpose of that is. And I should also say that in spite of my best efforts I've been unable to induce a flame out in the Twin Otter engines, and so I'm pretty convinced that none of this is really simulated in this model, other than the startup switch itself. But we've got the switches anyway, and it looks pretty cool. Okay, so what next? In fact, let's just, before we leave this, if I just flip this on and go through the startup sequence so you can see it live. In fact, before I do that, I'm going to make sure everything's off, fuel's off. If we just listen to that sound effect when we spool up the starter, you should hear the igniters firing as well. So yeah, you hear that tick 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 noise. That's the igniters firing. You notice that sound continues when I take my finger off the switch. That's just obviously a sound effect that's kicked off when I flip the switch. We've got to let it run to completion. But if we go through this in detail, I'm not using the checklist, so we'll be coming back to checklists in a different video later to look at that. But for now, what we'd be doing, we'd put the anti-collision beacon on so people know we're live. We check that the fuel is off. We don't want fuel too early, otherwise we're going to get an engine fire. We'd unfeather the props. We're going to put the fuel boost pump on for the right engine. Then we're going to start the engine by spinning it up. We don't put fuel in immediately. We've got to wait until the gas generator RPM achieves a certain minimum. Then we can introduce fuel. I'm just doing that by ear at the moment. We'd normally be looking at the gauge. And that engine lights. And then we do the same for the left-hand engine. We switch the boost pump on, spool the engine up, wait for 12% on the gas generator RPM. There is a gauge where I can't see it at the minute. And when we achieve that, we can introduce fuel. And there goes the engine. So that's the startup sequence. I'm going to shut it down now. So the electrical system. We have two independent 28 volt DC buses. The left one powered by the left engine's generator and the right one powered by the right engine's generator. We also have a third DC bus, which is the battery and external power bus, and this is connected to the left main DC bus only. Now that sounds a bit lopsided, but under normal operational conditions the buses are tied together, so if the left generator fails, both buses are powered by the right generator, and if the right generator fails, both buses are powered by the left generator, and if both generators fail, everything is powered by the battery. Of course, if the battery fails as well, that is a problem. We have two gauges for monitoring the DC system. The one on the left here is a voltmeter, and this is connected to the left main DC bus. This will show the condition of the battery if the generators are off, or the voltage available from the generator or generators if they're switched on. This gauge reads up to 30 volts. If we're on battery, we should expect to see 28 volts all the time, and if the generators are on, we should see something between 28 and 30 volts. The other gauge, this one on the right, is a load meter, and there's a switch beside it which is normally in the center position. If it's in the center position, we're seeing the load on the battery. Now if the generators are running as they are now, that should pretty much be reading 0 all the time. If I turn the generators off, you should see that deflects out to the right, showing a load on the battery. If I move that switch to the right, we're seeing the load on the right generator. If I move it to the left, we're seeing the load on the left generator. Now I'd assume that if the buses are tied together as they are here, the generators should be showing the same load. That doesn't appear to be the case. There's a slight discrepancy there. If I put some equipment on, we'll see a larger discrepancy. So that's battery, right generator, left generator. Now it may be that tying the buses together isn't as simple as connecting the generators in parallel, but I have read that there should be no more than 20 amps difference between the left and right generator loads. Now that scale, by the way, is different according to whether we're monitoring the battery load or generator load. It's marked from -1 to +1, and each of those major divisions, when we're looking at the battery, represents 10 amps. If we're looking at the generators, each division, that's each 0.1 on this scale between 0 and 1, represents 20 amps. A lot of equipment in the Twin Otter is powered by AC, so we've also got two AC buses, one running at 115 volts AC and one at 26 volts AC, and these are powered by two independent inverters, one connected to the left main DC bus and one connected to the right main DC bus. Now these don't run at the same time, so one's active and the other is available as a standby. So the implication there is, under certain conditions, it is possible, if we lose one of the generators, to lose AC power momentarily, and then we have to select manually the other inverter to restore it. Incidentally, the Twin Otter 400 series, which has been manufactured by Viking Air in British Columbia since 2010, has dispensed with AC power altogether, so everything runs off DC. There's a lot of other differences as well. It's a much more modern aircraft. Because the circumstances that would lead to us losing AC power are fairly contrived and would require the bus tie switch to be set to open, and that would only be something we do under a fault condition, but it is quite instructive to think about the consequences of untying the buses on all the electrics. Incidentally, although dual bus systems are common, in modern designs they tend to be redundant rather than complementary, and so the buses are usually untied by default. And this is safer because a failure on one bus can't take out equipment on the other bus with it. With an asymmetric system like the Twin Otters, some equipment's powered by one bus and some equipment's powered by the other. So if we untie the buses and we have a generator failure, we're going to lose some systems as well. Now there's generally a logic to which systems are powered by which bus. For example, you'll find that the indicator light for a right generator failure is powered by the left DC bus, while the indicator light for a left generator failure would be powered by the right DC bus. And that makes a lot of sense if you think it through. Now I'm not going to go through a whole list of which equipment is powered by each bus in any detail. You can explore that for yourself if you want to by untying the buses, switching the external battery switch to off so the battery is disconnected, and then systematically switching off the right and left generators and seeing what goes off. But as an example, if we come back to what I was saying about the AC equipment, if we open the bus tie, set inverter number 2 and then fail the right hand generator, that should take out all the AC equipment. So you can see a lot of things went off there, and we've got a warning light, 400 cycle warning light. That is the warning light to say that the inverter's failed or gone offline. It hasn't failed, it's gone offline. In fact, if we just do that again, so I failed the generator, we've got the 400 cycle light there. What should happen is, if I flip to inverter number 1, we get our equipment back and that light goes out. So that's the sort of experiment you can do for yourself if you want to. And by and large that all seems to work logically, although I have found one anomaly. I think it's an anomaly with the bus tie open and the battery off. If I fail the left generator, we get warning lights for the fore and aft boost pump 1, which is to be expected, and then the engine stop, which is not to be expected. What should happen is, when the fore and aft main boost pumps go offline, the standby pumps should start. and that doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen indeed if you try to do it manually. Nothing happens either. And that suggests to me that the main and standby boost pumps are powered by the same bus. Now that doesn't seem logical to me. So maybe it's an anomaly in the Twin Otter systems itself, or maybe it's a bug in the Aerosoft model. Who knows? Now all these systems do seem to be faithfully modelled in the Aerosoft Twin Otter, but you do have to wonder, you know, how relevant that is for day-to-day flying. There's no failure modes implemented other than the engine failure modes and the icing modes. So in practice, you know, none of this tap dancing with generators going offline and having to untie the buses and so on really has any relevance. And because it's all custom implemented, the FSX failure modes don't have any logical effect either. Of course we can simulate failure modes, kind of as I have been doing here by switching things on and off. So maybe we'll do some of that in a while, but for now let's get out of here. It's still raining, I can hear thunder in the background. Okay, the weather's cleared up a bit now, so what we're going to do is we're going to go on a little trip, and we're going to do some electrical experiments along the way. So let's get us started up before anything else. So let me just tell you a bit about the trip we're going to go on. We're going to look at some of the AUSIX airstrips. We're at Caloundra. We've got a lot of strips in easy reach. Now not all of them are in the GPS because they're little farm strips and bush strips, so we're going to have to use alternative methods of navigation. We're going to look at 2 or 3 different ways of doing that. En route, what we're going to do is, given that we've been talking about the electrical system, we're going to do a little experiment. At the moment we've got a fully charged battery. If we look at the battery load meter, it's showing 0, which means it's not charging, which means it's fully charged. If we switch off the generators temporarily, we've got roughly 28 volts showing on the voltmeter, which is what we'd expect. So what we're going to do is we're going to fail both the generators, and I'm going to fail them by essentially switching them off. So what we're going to see is we've got discharge on the load meter, which is going to start to run our battery down. In fact, we're going to make it worse than that. We're going to add in some stuff that we wouldn't normally have switched on, just to prove a point. What should we do? We'll put on things like the windshield heat. We put on the intake anti-ice, the prop de-ice, and we're basically full scale deflection there. So that's going to run the battery down pretty sharpish. And we're going to keep an eye on that just to see what consequences that might have. So let's get us to the runway and then we can talk some more. Okay, again, I'm not going to do any formal checks, run-up checks or anything like that. We'll assume all that's been done. I want to say just a little bit about where we're going and how we're going to navigate there. We're going to first of all go to a little strip called Mulaney North. We're not far from the town or city, probably town of Mulaney. This is the chart for Sunshine Coast, Brisbane vicinity, and we're at Caloundra, which is right here, and we're going to go to the west basically. The town of Mulaney's there, just south of a thing called Lake Baru. I can't read that. Now, because this is just a farm strip that we're going to, it's not on the GPS, but fortunately for us there's a VOR at Mulaney just the other side of where we want to be. So we're going to dial that in on the nav radio. It's 115.9. What we want to do is we want to track to the VOR on the roughly the 270 radial. We can dial that radial in even though we haven't got the station yet. We want to stop short of the VOR by about 6 miles, it looks like. So we're going to take off on runway 12. We'll do a little bit of a loop and come back over the airfield just so you get a good look at it, because this is a great piece of scenery. Okay, we can take off the odd feather arm, get the flaps in. Beautiful evening. Look at that scenery. Come back in, off on the props. Now we're going to turn it onto our westerly heading now. There's the airfield, we're going overhead. So let's give it the autopilot now. Nav capture right away, altitude alert. We want to make sure we've got the right VOR in, so just gonna look for that ident again. That'll do nicely. We're going pretty fast. 140 knots. I'm going to slow down. Because we're in altitude hold, we can just slow it down by winding the power all the way back. Got to reset the props when we go below 70%. And so the speed's coming back to what, 135, 130. Let's go back a bit more. Of course, we're flying into the sun now, it's the evening. That's going to make things a little bit hazy. Visibility's not bad at all really, 20-30 miles. 8.5, so we should be seeing that strip pretty much about now. And actually there it is over to the right. So I'm going to come off autopilot, I'm going to crank us around. That's the strip there. You can see just bits of bare earth probably. What I'll do is I'll go over the leg, then I'll come around and do a low approach, just so we get a good look at it. I definitely recommend, if you've got the Orbix Australia SP4 scenery, definitely recommend getting these Aussie X strips. They're absolutely fantastic strips, beautifully done for the most part, and beautifully blended in with the scenery as well. You know, complete difference to the FSX default strips. These are really difficult to find. One of the challenges is finding the strips. We're going to see that in a little while, finding another strip. This one's not too much of a challenge, although it's really well blended in. It's still a very distinctive strip, and so pretty easy to find. But you know, you can get 350 strips for your Australia scenery, and they're all, for the most part, tiny little bush strips and farm strips. Absolutely fantastic if you like this sort of flying. So here we go, we're going to fly up the runway, more or less. I say runway, it's a field. And you'll get a good look at it. You might recognise this from my BN2 Islander review video. That's where we did the elaborate planning for landing the Islander. So there we go. That wasn't very helpful scenery glitch. So there's that strip. Okay. So that's Mulaney North. What we're going to do now is we're going to go up to another Aussie X strip, Gympie. Gympie's on the GPS, so we're going to look for that. It's already there set. We're going to go direct to. We're going to make sure we've got the nav GPS set to GPS this time. We're on nav, so we dial that in, and the GPS is going to take us to Gympie. It's 28.5 miles. We're going to check in on our battery. Remember, we're running this battery into the ground. We got 22.5, 23 volts. Just for the moment, we're going to turn off some of that equipment. We don't want to run it into the ground just yet. So we've turned off all that heating stuff. The load's gone back down to 0.4. What we're going to do, unless it gets dark before we get there, it shouldn't do, we're almost there, we're going to be looking for another strip called Gumborean. Now the problem with that is it's not on the GPS, and also we don't have any nearby VORs to help us navigate. But fortunately for us, when these Aussie X strips first came out, there was a great document which came along with them, and I have that here actually, and it's got a listing of all the fields and how to find them with reference to other nearby strips. So we've got, if we look up Gumborean, it's again, this is a tiny farm strip, and it's, where is it? It's located with reference to Gympie. So it says if we go to Gympie and steer 005 degrees for 12 miles, we're going to find the strip, and it's a strip with a fairly short runway, and it's an uphill runway, and it's oriented 1028, and it goes uphill to the west. So there we go, we'll get to Gympie, overhead Gympie. We're going to steer 005 degrees, 12 miles, and we can, if we've got a direct 2 course set to Gympie, that 12 mile readout will show as we depart it. We might try and land there. We'll have to see what the wind's doing. There's only really one possible landing direction, that's uphill, because it's a very steep hill. We don't want to be landing downhill. Let's just, if we check out the ATIS.
Yankee Golf, Yankee Mike, airport information, Romeo 112, Zulu, weather, wind 145 at 5, visibility 107,
145 at 5.
4, 2.17, QNH 1010, advise on additional contact and weather information, Romeo, Yankee Golf, Yankee Mike, airport information, Romeo 112, Zulu, weather, wind 145 at 5, visibility 107.
145 at 5. Now there's Gympie ahead. I'm going to come off autopilot just so we can do a little bit of an orbit, and you can see that. We've got a nice grass strip crossing there as well. Okay, so we're looking for a northerly heading from here we're going to take it off nav. .005, it's about there. We'll put it onto heading hold, and we're going to look for 12 miles. So we're at 4 miles. Remember, this is we're doing this with reference to Gympie, which is now behind us. And that town out to the right probably is the town of Gympie. The left, sorry. Can't tell me left from me right. And we're about to go off the map, so even if this strip was on the map, it's not on this map. This is not going to be a lighted strip. This is a little, you know, farm agricultural strip, and you may not even see it. So we need some lights on, really. We need position strobes. We've got panel lights on. That's all we need. 9, 10, so about 2 miles to go. We're going to slow it right down. We should be able to see it, if we're going to see it. Actually, I can see it. It's that little green stripe just there. I think that blending works well in the daytime. Maybe it makes it a little bit more obtrusive in the evening. But that's working in our favour, really. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn out to the east. We're going to swing out over that pasture land there, and we're going to come in. Maybe we'll land there. Maybe we'll land there, or maybe we'll go back to Gympie and land at Gympie. Checking out my battery, still in the low 20s. One of the things we should be monitoring is down here on the right lower console, there's a battery temperature gauge. It's currently just crept into the yellow, 120 degrees. There's a warning light associated with that, and when the temperature gets too high, that warning light will come on. So we're going to have another look at that as well in a little while. So what I think we'll do is we'll beat up the runway, and then we'll go back to Gympie. I'll go a little bit to the left, to the right of the runway, just so we get a better view. Terrain ahead, I know there's terrain ahead, thank you. So there's the strip there, little plane parked at the edge. That windsock's going mad, I don't know what's going on there. Okay, so let's go back to Gympie. We're on GPS, we want to put nav hold onto autopilot, altitude alert, make it 2,500 feet for the return. Okay, what's the battery doing? Battery temperature gauge is pretty static. Let's put some load back on. Put the windshield's heat on again, and we should see that battery gauge start to creep up. Okay, 11 miles to Gympie. Elevation 260. We don't have any runway information, but we're okay, we can see. We should be able to make a straight. Yeah, I can pretty much make out the runway from here. I'm going to switch on to heading hold. I'm going to take us out this way. Those lights all just came on that road. So we need to be descending as well. So we're going to come off altitude hold. Let's have some landing lights. Let's have some flaps. And that battery temperature is well into the red now. We've got the warning light, although nothing else seems to be happening. So we're approaching a bit of a critical situation with this electrical system. The battery voltage is dropping. It's about 21 volts at the moment. When we get to 20 volts, that's not going to be enough to power the systems, and everything's going to shut down. We've still got a fairly hefty load on that DC bus at the moment. I'm going to turn off the last thing that we had draining that. I mean, that was the windshield heat. We've still got other things switched on, of course. But what we need to do is get one of those generators back online. If we put the left generator on, two things you notice. The voltage goes back up to about 28.5, 29 volts. The DC load on the battery, remember, is what we're looking at, immediately drops below zero, and that shows the battery's charging. If we look at the left generator now, we've got a hefty load on that, nothing on the right generator because that's switched off. Back to the battery. If we switch the right generator online as well, the warning light went out. I'm not sure if you can see that in the view that we've got shown there. If we now show right generator, we've got a bit of a load on that, bit of a load on the left generator. So that's what we would do, and the battery would hopefully over time it's going to charge back up. In fact, if I leave it for a little while, we'll check that out. So there it is a few minutes later, and we can see the battery's charging up there. We're at discharge of about 0.25 there. So we're steadily approaching zero, and if we turn the generators off again, we should see that voltage, battery voltage, is now gone back up to about 25.5 volts. So we're definitely charging. That seems to work as expected. So there's Gympie. We've got a nicely illuminated set of buildings there. The sun's behind us. The runway is not lit, but we've got plenty of light still left. We could go for the HUD. Just demonstrate that. $650 feet, 84 knots. That's pretty much on the money. Hope we can turn that off. Slightly featured. Oh, ballooned it yet. Come on, baby. There we go. Slightly featureless runway. Don't need reverse thrust. Let's have taxi lights as well. Probably should have started slowing down a bit sooner there. Alright, that'll do.